I'll show you an example of a command interceptor in action. One often suggested use for command interceptors is to apply query hints to your SQL commands that are headed to the database. Imagine that the DBA consultant, our publisher contracted to optimize our database performance, has suggested that any queries against the authors table should use a SQL Server hint called robust plan. Here's my custom DB command interceptor that inherits from the DB command interceptor, and I'm overriding the reader executing method. In my logic, I inspect the command's command text property to see if authors is anywhere in the command that's about to be sent to the database. If so, then I append a string to the command, option, open paren, robust plan, close paren. And remember, I'm returning the result that came into the method, so that EFCore will continue processing it. I also want to point out this to-do note. If you're making asynchronous calls, in other words, using async link execution methods like toListAsync, then you'll need to override the asynchronous version of the virtual method. Now let's look at pub context. I've appended the addInterceptors method to the options builder, and I'm passing in a new instance of my custom DB command interceptor. In my program class, I have a method that will execute a query to get all authors, and then another one to get all books. I'll go ahead and run this with a breakpoint in the interceptor so we can look at that, and then we'll look at the logs. Here we are in the interceptor, and I'll just have the debugger show the incoming parameters. There's the DB command with a command text and all kinds of other information for command. There's the event data, which has a collection of details you might want to inspect or alter, and the result. Notice that the result object's hasResult property is false. So when the result gets passed back to EFCore in this state, that's telling EFCore to just keep working. I'll let this finish working, and over in the log, you can see that the query hint was indeed appended to the authors query, but not to the second query because that didn't contain the word authors. There are better ways to determine if the incoming command is the one you want to modify. For example, you can add query tags to your link queries and then look for those tags in the interceptor. And there are other interesting ways to use interceptors. One I mentioned earlier in this course is to implement soft deletes in EFCore. So you would set the interceptors up such that when EFCore sees a delete coming in, it would change the command to an update command, and it would set some flag column you've created like is deleted, setting that to true, instead of actually deleting the row. Then, for any incoming query, you can modify the SQL to exclude any row where that is deleted column is true. I'll include a link to an example of soft deletes in the resources. There's something I consider a gotcha with the command interceptors because I forget it frequently and I have to scramble around until I'm back on the right path. So I want you to be aware of that. If you want to intercept a command that sends data to the database, whether it's an insert, an update, or a delete triggered by saved changes, or maybe even raw SQL, I seem to always default to the virtual non-query executing and non-query executed methods. That seems to make sense, right? It's not a query. But when I'm debugging a method that uses saved changes, I never hit these. Save changes calls triggers the reader executing and executed methods. Remember that any insert will also have a query with it to return the updated keys. So save changes needs the logic from the reader methods. Hopefully I've saved a few of you from some future head scratching when trying to debug an interceptor defined to affect updates to the database. You've just seen quite a few ways to tap into EFCore's pipeline, and unlike the logging, which can tell you a lot about what's happening in the workflow, the events and interceptors and virtual methods allow you to affect its behavior or even the data that's going into the database or what's being returned. When you're focused on the save changes pipeline, whether it's through overriding the save changes method, wiring up event handlers, or intercepting the events, the change tracker entries is an important method as it returns the details of the data that the context is tracking. You saw me modify those details by setting the value of a last updated shadow property, which became part of the SQL command sent to the database. While I've shown you some basic interaction with each of these features, I do want to be sure you understand the importance of learning more about these various patterns to make sure you don't create unexpected side effects. Testing, of course, is important, but there are also more advanced resources that can share deeper expertise as well. And with that, we have reached the end of EF Course 6 Fundamentals. It's been a pleasure to create this course and share this information with you, as I've been researching and using and teaching about Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core since its inception. And I've been so proud of my friends at Microsoft and many contributors in the community for the great work they continue to do on this framework. And I'm so happy to show off their work. Thank you very much for joining me. Of course, here are some last resources relevant to this particular module. I'm Julie Lerman, and enjoy your EF Core 6 journey with all of your new knowledge.